Donna Knapp here. Welcome to ITSM Academy and welcome to this month's webinar. We are super excited about our webinar today because one of our absolute favorite people is in the house, Michael Cardinal. Hey, Mike.
Hello.
So, Mike has 35 years of experience in IT and education. He's worked as a manager, a consultant, an analyst, and a trainer and teacher. And for a few years, he did that for ITSM Academy, so we very much consider him family here. A director, business architect, idle master, and certified process design engineer, of course, our favorite certification. Mike's resume spans several industries, and including insurance, manufacturing, retail, food service, and education. And one of the things I really like about just getting to spend time with Mike is one of his earlier careers was as a history professor. And so he is a master at really talking about, bringing historical ideas and theories forward into the current day. And that's a lot of what he's going to do in today's webinar. He's talked at, many IT and academic events and published several papers on service management, including papers on ITSM Professor, which is our blog here at the Academy. So let's not spend any more time. Uh, Mike, to you.
All right. Thanks, Donna. Hello. Welcome, everyone. I really appreciate your time today. So, at one point in time in my life and still in my own mind, I spent some time studying history. It's where I really began my whole career as a professional. And when I was approached about doing a webinar for the Academy, a topic came to mind that I had many, many years experience thinking about and working in and loving to talk about. And it's really been sort of on the top of my mind lately, given some changes in my own work world and in the world in general. And that is the topic of culture. And when you become a historian, like many professions, one of the things you do is you kind of pick a specialty. So whether you're a doctor or a lawyer or a historian or a teacher or whatever, you pick a specialty. And my specialty happened to be culture. I am a social and what's known as a social and cultural historian. So I study why people have done things in the past, how it's all come together from a cultural standpoint. And just like with ITSM, where you may pick a specialty, you may be someone who's more interested in strategy or operations or continual improvement, those kind of things. I spent my life as a teacher and as a researcher and historian studying how civilizations and societies come together and how they form and what makes them what they are. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to bring that forward, as Donna said, and talk about that, though, in a context of the modern work world, particularly around service management. So if you're ready, we'll go ahead and dive in today. So one of the things, and Donna and I were talking a while ago, we talk every week basically, and one of the things that keeps coming up is this idea of culture and what is culture? How do we deal with that? How do we shift? And what I realized is there's really a conundrum that people are facing. They think and believe they know what culture is and how it works, but the more I interact with people, the more I see that they're not really seeing what culture truly is defined as and how it works. And I'm not trying to um, you know, change your basic nature, but just sort of present some myths and some truths, and then walk through how some of that stuff works in terms of a better way to look at culture and understand it in a bigger picture. So that's the conundrum, right? And a conundrum is a difficult or complex or really challenging problem that we face, right? And so understanding culture itself is a conundrum. All right, so why do people struggle with this? Why do people struggle with companies struggle with culture? Basically, because they may be using an incorrect definition. That's one of the things I've seen. But they also, as I said, carry with them some myths or maybe some assumptions about culture that aren't necessarily fully true. So, what I've done here is I've provided you what I believe is the best definition of culture, and it makes sense once I get further into the material. And this deck will be available, as always, on the Academy website. So the idea is culture is something that is really personal. That's the first thing that people make the mistake, that they think that culture is something that comes only in groups, but it's not. What the way that I define and experts in history, in the history circles at least define, and I advocate that we use it in the business world, is culture is the known environment in which you live and work. If I don't know something, if I have no knowledge of it, or I don't encounter it or make it part of who I am or how I work, it's not part of my culture. It's not part of my group's culture, my team's culture, my company's culture. It's outside of us, right? And that's one of the things, right? Is known, it's the known environment. I know some Latin, I know some Greek, having studied history. Somebody else who doesn't know those things, it's not part of their culture, but it is part of my culture. And so we have to understand, based on this definition, what is it that is true about culture? Well, what's true, let's go through some myths first. So, first off, like I said, culture is something that exists at a corporate level and is defined by an organization. Culture is not something you define. You can't set out and say, I want these elements to be part of my culture. Culture is an aggregate. Culture is a combination of all the individual people cultures within your organization. So each one of us has our own culture when we get together, like right now in this webinar. We have a culture because you are part of this group. I am part of this group. We are forming our own current temporary culture, and culture is not something that stays forever. It comes and goes, and so it's a little bit more amorphous and difficult to nail down, and people think that they can just kind of like create it as a single entity. So that's the second myth, right? Is that culture is this thing. I nail it to the wall or I put it on a piece of paper and that's our culture. But that's not necessarily true. The next thing that is not necessarily true is that once I create culture, it's done, right? I've got it. I can set it and forget it, and that it is never going to change unless I purposefully change it. Going back to the first one, that it's something I design so I can change it as a leader or as an organization or as a group of people, that we can change these things purposefully. It's not static, it is dynamic. And then culture really does not just exist at some enterprise level, right? It's not something that comes along with your vision and your mission and goals and objectives. Everything you do, the known environment in which your organization works or you work, is your culture. It's something that aggregates together. Like I said, it exists from individuals on up through the organization because it is that combination of everything we know and do together as a group. Once someone leaves that culture, that those elements are no longer part of your culture. So we see this all the time. A leader leaves an organization and then everybody's like, oh my gosh, we're changing and everything's different. Of course you're changing. Of course you're different, because a key part of the aggregation of your culture just left, right? You've just removed part of that culture. It's not like the culture stays even though someone leaves. You pull people out of these things, culture changes. It's just inevitable. Change is the only constant in the universe. All right. So by understanding this idea that culture starts at an individual level and moves up and aggregates to the bigger level, then we can have a better handle on, okay, well, how do I manage this stuff? How do I understand it? How do I make it work? How do I know what's happening? How do I not know what's happening? These kind of things, right? So by sort of focusing on the truths that there are something that we fulfill based on needs, right? Culture helps us, is driven from needs, and we'll get to that in a second point here. There are actually multiple components of culture that you can kind of watch and not so much control, but kind of maneuver and govern and watch a little bit. Culture is dynamic, it's ever changing, and you have to recognize that it's ever changing. And as people come in and people go, your culture is going to change and you have to adapt to that. And that's just the nature of organizational change, right? And then, like I said, it's really starts at an individual level, and that's where we have to understand and start our journey on understanding and solving this culture conundrum. If I can go forward. All right, so what is this foundation of understanding culture? If we now have this definition, and most of you have been on webinars or been in my classes or know me, I always start with those definitions things because everything builds from definitions. Where do we start this journey? Where do we start understanding culture? Well, we have to understand first and foremost, companies, teams, groups, and individuals are driven by needs. Our companies, all of the things that we work on, really we exist to fill needs. Those could be individual needs of our employees or ourselves. They could be team needs. They could be stakeholder needs. They could be stockholder needs, right? Investor needs. They could be customer needs. It's all about needs. And I always like to use the example of the movie that Robin Williams was in many, many years ago. It was an animated movie called Robots, if you saw that. And the catchphrase of that movie was see a need, fill a need. That's what people do. That's all of history. History is the history of the world is the history of needs filled and unfulfilled, right? So what are needs? How do we understand what these needs are so that we can then understand how that drives culture? Well, we have to start with this thing called drive theory. Every one of us has within us two basic drivers. And these two basic drivers get split into primary needs and secondary needs, right? This is just basic human evolution and function and biology, right? Primary needs, the need to breathe, the need to eat, the need to sleep. These are your basic physical kind of needs. Many of them are automatic, somewhat, right? You have to feed yourself in those, but breathing and heartbeat and all of those are primary needs. Your body just needs to keep functioning. Secondary needs are all of the needs that you desire on top of your basic physical needs. So those are the things like, hey, I want to go visit this place because I want some kind of enjoyment need, or I have some kind of intellectual need, or I have some kind of other type of need. It has nothing to do with me breathing or living or eating or sleeping. It has to do with fulfillment, right? And it's these two, the interplay of these two sets of needs that drive everything. Okay. Now, we take that drive theory that we're all driven by fulfilling needs in some way, and we add in something called arousal theory. And arousal theory is the idea that when we fill these needs, our mental state goes up. Arousal here meaning, added dopamine, added serotonin, all of those chemicals kick off and go, "Ooh, I like this. This is good." Right? So our brain state is aroused and our neurons are firing and the brain is working and everything, this is where you get the endorphins and all of that, right? When you fail to fill needs, then it comes down into a slump, right? And you get into those slump. And the reason that you're in that slump is because certain either physical primary needs are not being fulfilled. You haven't eaten, you haven't slept, you haven't drank water, you haven't whatever, or you're feeling unfulfilled in your secondary needs. So you're going through this constant up and down state of fulfilling needs and then losing the fulfillment of those needs and then filling them again and then losing them again and filling them in again. And right. And so all of this drive theory, this arousal theory came together in the work of maybe somebody you're familiar with, a guy named Abraham Maslow. And in the 1950s, he kind of put all of this concept together into something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the basic idea was that humans fill needs from this base element of like, hey, I need food, water, shelter, our basic physiological needs, all the way up to what he called self-actualization, where you're fulfilled mentally, spiritually, emotionally, all of those things, right? So we have a model, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to work off of. Okay. So it's really Maslow's hierarchy that then forms the basis of what we understand to be culture. So we take Maslow's hierarchy, and you can go Google and look all you want on that. But basically, if we take those primary needs and those secondary needs and we look at Maslow's hierarchy, what we can do is we can see that in the end, our needs fall into two big buckets, right? Survival and improvement. So our basic needs are our survival needs, and that then forms the lower layer of our culture. So any culture that you look at, whether it's an individual culture or it's a company culture, or group culture, the first thing you have to do is make sure you're surviving. You're filling your primary needs, right? Without those primary needs in place, none of the stuff above it, the improvement stuff, doesn't work. Okay. And you can map this to things like ITIL, right? So the very first sort of stages of the ITIL flows and the service management flows really are your base, filling your base needs and kind of getting those in place. And then what's at the end of it? Improvement. Right. So if you go back to version 3, even in the newer versions, version or in ITIL 4, you can see the elements of these basic needs versus more advanced needs, or survival versus improvement needs. All right, so now we have the theoretical basis behind what culture is. What we have to do is then build a model that's going to work for us in terms of organizations. And that's where these components. So culture is not just one thing. I've kind of showed you. There's two big buckets. There's this survival or primary needs, and there's these improvement and secondary needs. Let's break those down, and how do we fill all of those needs? Right? So how we fill those needs is understanding the six components that make up culture, right? So culture is a mirror of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Just talked about that. It's broken down into two big buckets. The bottom ones of protective, organizational, and value components are your basic survival type components or primary needs. And then the ones above it, interaction, spiritual, and intellectual, are your secondary needs. Okay, so what are these things? So a protective need or a protective component is the capacity of a person or an organization to survive. This is your basic survival thing. You're sort of protecting your world. From a business standpoint, this is the kind of thing that results, as an example, in employment stability, right? You have to make sure that people feel there is employment stability. They have to feel that they're going to get a paycheck, and understand that life is not necessarily all about money. You'll see that as you go up through the layers, right? But what you have to do is, if you don't pay people, none of the rest of it matters. So you got to have employment stability, right? Second of all, people are group, we're sort of pack entities. And so we have to feel that we're not isolated. People who have been, science has shown when you isolate people, I just went and visited where they do, film the movie Shawshank, saw the isolation cells and the individual cells. When you isolate people, people go crazy. So people have to feel that they're in some sort of organizational structure. And this is where they have to know kind of where they are in a hierarchy or in a flat organization. And although we're trying to get away from complex bureaucracies and those things, people have to kind of know, okay, well, who's above me, who's below me, who's to my left, who's to my right, who's in front of me, who's in back of me. People need placement, right? And that's what you got to kind of start by making sure they got a paycheck. Then you got to make sure they understand where they are in the organization. And if you're not kind of putting org charts out there and just at least letting people know functionally kind of where they sit in the grand scheme of things, they're going to struggle. Okay. Next, they have to understand from things like a financial standpoint, where is value being driven, right? So they have to feel like they're contributing in some way to value, whether that be financial value, emotional value, whatever value, right? The utility and warranty definition of value, efficiency, effectiveness, whatever. People have to feel like they're contributing to something and giving to something, right? And this is where the money thing comes in, because the money really is just a mechanism, again, and we'll talk about these things, that help you with the other things, right? So you can't pay people unless you're making money. So it kind of all works together, but you're filling these things from the bottom up. You got to there's an implied order here, right? When you've got people paid and they know where they are in the organization and they kind of know what their jobs are and know how they contribute to things, that's when you start moving away from these primary survival needs into these secondary needs of culture. And unfortunately, so often people think the top part is culture. It's not, it's all of this, right? So knowing that when I go to an employment, when I get employed, knowing that I've got stability, I'm not going to potentially be unemployed in a month or 10 years or whatever, helps me, right? That's part of my culture, and it's going to make me work more effectively within the organization. But at some point in time, I'm going to cross this line. And Daniel Pink kind of talks about this in a book called Drive, but that's not all of where I took this. You can see down in the corner. This is actually the work. It comes from a book called Evolution of Civilizations by a PhD historian, Carol Quigley. He's passed away. But the idea is then once we're past that sort of value stage, now I have to kind of give the secondary needs. So I've got to go out and I've got to have interaction. So people have to be able to collaborate with each other and not necessarily feel that they're lone wolves, right? And you've got to give them the capability to collaborate and cooperate and work together, whether that's virtually or in person or those kind of things, right? So they've got to be able to know there are other people they can turn to and other resources they can turn to, that they're not sort of out on their own. And then from there, they have to get the feels, right? The modern youngins call these the feels, right? They've got to feel something. They've got to feel or have some kind of emotional feedback to these. And a lot of the top ones are really feedback mechanisms into the person, where the bottom ones are where they're putting outward, right? Things, my employment, my value, my contribution to the organization. I need something to come back to me. And so those interactions and those emotions are really important. People have to feel that they're special in some ways, or they feel that they're valued, or that they are an important part. And this is where a lot of companies fall down. They don't, that and this isn't talking about just all sorts of fun unicorns and rainbows and how great we are. This is just the like, man, you're doing a great job. I try to say this to my employees all the time. You're doing fantastic. I have no issues with what you're doing. Instead of like pointing out everything they're doing wrong, I try to do the, hey, let's build you up. I'm trying to get them up the pyramid of culture, not down the pyramid of culture. And then finally, they've got to feel like there's some kind of mastery, autonomy, and purpose. I stole those from Daniel Pink, right? They've got to feel like, hey, I'm a master of my own domain. I'm smart. I'm intelligent. I have knowledge. I have capability, and people recognize those things. I have to be allowed to not be micromanaged. I want to feel part of a team, but I don't want somebody breathing down my neck all the time. I want to feel like, hey, here's a task, go do that thing. And when you come back, let's talk about it. Right. And then greater purpose. Right. Now, here's the thing you can see on the right hand side, the bottom part's the easy stuff, the top part's the harder stuff. So we're going from least complex to most complex. And when an organization starts to fail, they fail from the top down. So you can kind of almost watch, and this is what happens with civilizations. You can watch civilizations collapse by sitting in the stands and watching it, right? When the intellectual aspect or capacities of a civilization or a company start to fall apart and become less important, then the spiritual stuff or the emotional stuff, when they're no longer giving you the kudos, when they're no longer saying good job, they're just expecting you to do your job and do it well, right? When you stop feeling like people are listening to you and that there's cooperation and collaboration, and then when they go, yeah, it's all about the money and we just have to make money, 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 okay, you're on your way to collapse. When there's lots of reorgs all the time because they can't seem to settle on where and how things should work, and they're trying to reorganize as if that's going to make things better. It's not, right? And then down at the bottom, they finally kind of go, you know what? No more raises. We can't afford to give anybody raises, or we can't afford to pay anybody, or we can't hire new people. You have to take on 10 people's jobs, right? So you can see that collapse happening in real time in companies and organizations and even in teams, right? Even in individuals. Right. So this is the basis that you want to work from. You want to understand in your organization, are you filling each of these needs in the right order? And you can't skip from paying somebody at the bottom all the way to, hey, I'm going to give you autonomy and mastery. You've got to build them up to this. If you know Bloom's taxonomy, based on the same concept, Deming's value cycle. Yes, Donna said Deming, right? Deming's value cycle and the Plan Do Check Act, right? PDCA and Plan Do Study Act, based on the same thing. You've got to start with the simple things and move to the more complex things, and it starts to fall apart if you don't do it in order. All right, so how do we make this work? How do we make these components of culture play out in an organizations? Well, they don't just exist for themselves unto themselves. What we have to do is we have to build instruments. And the definition of an instrument is not something you play, even though that is a type of instrument. An instrument is simply a mechanism that you create or you have or you get that is used to fulfill some kind of need or deliver a component of culture. And I've given you here some examples of organizational instruments, right? So a competitive salary is an instrument for fulfilling the protective need, right? So by giving people a competitive salary and they feel like they're being paid for their work, then you've filled their protective needs. They feel, okay, I've got employment. And these are not the only examples, just some quick ones, right? That I've set up teams and I've kind of in the agile world, right, self-directing teams and kind of given them and empowered them to go and do things. Now I feel like I'm part of an organization. I'm part of a group of people. Doesn't mean I can't work on my own, but at least I know that I'm not alone. Right. I've got processes in place that helps me drive value. The outcomes of processes is value. And if your processes aren't working, then you're not fulfilling that value component. Collaboration tools, right? Giving people access to things like Zoom and Teams and not making it difficult for people to interact and to communicate, especially in the virtual world, in the remote world, right? These tools are absolutely vital to fill that interaction need, right? If I'm at home, I've worked from home for many, many years. If I'm at home and I never talk to anybody, I'm going to go stir crazy. Okay. Recognition and rewards, like I said, that's the spiritual side, the emotional side. I feel valued. I feel like somebody sees me. I feel like somebody recognizes who I am and what I contribute. And I've got to have those feels. And again, it's not all about rainbows and puppy dogs, but it could be just about the good old pat on the back or hey, thanks and appreciate. And I just really enjoy working with you. Just something simple. It doesn't have to be, these don't have to be complex. And then measures and metrics are instruments really of intellectual capability. So by looking at how well we're doing, it's feedback, just like in Bloom's taxonomy, that highest level in Bloom is evaluation, the same kind of thing. Measures and metrics are about evaluation. It's not meant to punish, it's meant to recognize and optimize. Are we really achieving those higher levels of mastery, autonomy, and purpose or not? So, what happens when we put these instruments in place and we get more and more and more of these instruments, and then all of a sudden these instruments take on a life of their own and they grow and become this monster that we no longer have control of? Well, that's when instruments become institutions. And an institution is really an instrument that exists for the sake of existing. It no longer fulfills its original need. It just takes on this life of its own, and we just assume that it's good because it's been around forever and we just do this because it's the way it's done, right? It's not, there's no basis in reality, really. It's just the way we've done these. So here's some examples of things that can get out of hand and become institutions, right? Excessive policies. Policies are good, right? They can be an instrument. Each one of these starts as an instrument, right? Policies being intention or expectation. But when you have policies on top of policies on top of policies for the sake of having policies to talk about and you get in this Dilbert world, you've turned your policies from an instrument to an institution. And they no longer serve an effective purpose. They just suck resources into themselves, right? And they take too much time and energy. They take away from your ability to fulfill the top levels of your needs and really just draw all the energy out of those bottom needs. Bureaucracy, right? Having layers and layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy just for the sake of bureaucracy, again, can be an organizational kind of institution. 9 people to approve change records? Really? Really, folks? Do we need 9 people to approve? Do we need everybody's name on an approval? Or can we set up levels of RACI and trust that, when somebody approves it, they're taking on the accountability and making it happy? RACI itself is an instrument, but when it becomes all about the RACI instead of about what you're doing with it, it's an institution. The whole idea of return to office can be good, but returning to office for the sake of returning to office, getting people into a building just because you're paying for that building and you got to have people in the building, yeah, that's now an institution. It's taken on a life of its own. Pizza parties. This is that rainbows and unicorns thing, right? You see memes about it all the time, like, hey, we did $10 billion in profits this year. Here's a slice of pizza, right? These things have become this meme, this sort of state or I don't know what the other word I'm thinking of, but this sort of tried and true but overused method of like, here's a good, thanks and appreciate it. Right? It's not that providing people an opportunity to intermingle and feeding them, everybody likes food, is part of your protective thing, right? Is feeding people. But when it becomes the thing, the way to do this, then it's an institution. Okay. And then big data, right? Collecting data for the sake of collecting data. And Donna's heard me say it. A lot of people have heard me say it. If you are not doing something with this data and making decisions and choices and validations and things, why? Why are you gathering all this data? Because you can, right? For the sake of it, then it's no good, right? Doesn't do you any good. All right. So it's very easy. We have to be very careful because these things that we think are tools or instruments can quickly turn over and become institutions. They take on a life of their own. And then it's really hard to get rid of them. And then they'll just suck all the resources and energy out of your organization. Right. So we just have to be really careful. And again, another point where we see sort of that failing or falling apart of organizations in terms of culture is when an organization has more institutions than instruments, it's more likely to fail. It's not that it is on its way to failure completely, but when you are top heavy in institutions, it's crushing everything below it, including your people. And so your culture has sort of flipped the pyramid, right? And you've got this giant weight weighing down on people, and they're just, like I said, their energy and their resources and their time and effort just get drawn from them just trying to survive in the organization. So we've got a poll. Donna, I'm ready for the first poll. Right? So, which of the following describes your company today, right? Where are you on the spectrum? It's not a perfect spectrum. Just want to get sort of an idea of where you think you are, right? Are you really good? You only have instruments in place and everything's working great, all the way down to you are fully instituted, everything is just taking on a life of its own kind of thing. Or maybe you don't know. Maybe you're not sure. So just give it a couple minutes, give it a guess. This is not scientific by any means.
It's interesting, Mike. This is where I think we go astray with frameworks sometimes. You can
Correct.
talk about idle or agile or, talk about any of the modern frameworks. It becomes about that framework and doing it that way. That gets
Yeah.
institutionalized, and we lost sight a long time ago of why we're actually doing it.
And I see that a lot in clients, especially with Agile lately, is everybody's so focused on, but are you doing your Agile ceremonies? And did you do this thing? And is your story format correctly? And like, you forgot somewhere along the line, you forgot the purpose of Agile, right? Because the purpose of Agile is to be agile, right? By adding in all these ceremonies and stuff, yes, you have turned Agile, the instrument, into Agile, the institution.
So we have about 61%. It
Okay.
slowed down a little bit, so we'll give everybody few more seconds, going once, going twice. And, you know, I'm not surprised that lots of folks say they have too many institutions. I don't know. How do
I'm not,
you?
I'm not seeing the
So
results. There we
there,
go.
you
Okay.
should be seeing it now.
Yeah, this is typical, right? This is modern business world. We have way institutionalized things. And so when even things like agile and these frameworks, to Donna's point, and then we wonder why things aren't working well, why we can't move faster, why we can't be flexible and adaptable. We've done it to ourselves. We've created the problem by taking these instruments and turning them into institutions instead of questioning the instrument. Is the instrument still valid? That's what you should be doing with your culture. It should be doing that with all the aspects of your culture. The way we fill our protective needs, is that still a valid thing? The way that we have our teams and organizations, is that still valid? It's not that you want to change it over and over and over. That's not good continual as opposed to continuous improvement, right? But you want to look and constantly kind of understand that's the dynamic nature of your culture. It's not set it and forget it. It's what do we need to adjust in our culture today to be able to do these things in the future? So, yeah, not surprised at all. Not surprised at all.
So is that what you mean, Mike, by too many instruments, where you keep adding instruments and instead of maybe taking away some instruments that are no longer applicable to your environment?
Correct. So this is what I've laid out here is sort of a maturity flow, right? That most organizations, a brand new small company would start out, they'd only have instruments because they've not just been around long enough to let the culture grow and mature, but over time, they just keep adding tools. I don't know, and I'm working for Cognizant now. We've got a number of tools. At what point is too many platforms, right? When you have the same tools that are doing the same thing in multiple ways in multiple places, then now you've got too many instruments. Maybe they haven't turned into institutions yet, but they're on their way. Because that's kind of the flow is you bring all this stuff in and then you don't get rid of it. You become cultural hoarders. Wonderful. Okay. So how do we deal with this? How do we make all of this work? Well, now we have an understanding of what is culture and how it functions and what we have to look at. What tools are out there, what instruments are out there for us to be able to leverage for our culture? Well, one that I found that I really, really like and have introduced to a number of people is something called the competing values framework. I did not create this. This is me using this from other places. But the idea is that you can take your culture and you can kind of look at the characteristics of that culture, its makeup of all the individuals and everything that you have, and you can kind of slot it into some rough quadrants. The idea is that you are never only one of these quadrants. You are never only one part of this and you never change. It's you may shift between these. Can you purposefully shift? Can you kind of indicate we are no longer a collaborative culture. We are now a competitive culture. It doesn't work quite that way. You have to kind of work it from the inside out, and we'll talk about that. You have to make the shift purposefully as opposed to just declaring it. But the idea here is that you start with understanding where you fall in these quadrants and then decide, is that where you want to be? Is that where you want to continue your organization? Does that work for you in terms of culture? And then you make the changes to your culture that either keep you in that quadrant or start shifting to some other quadrant where you want to be, right? So some of the concepts here, right? So the idea of collaborate, create, control, compete, these are the basic values that drive each of these quadrants. You can kind of see there's internal versus external, flexible versus focused quadrants here or axes. And so what you're doing is just kind of looking at where do I really sort of sit? Are we much more overall? I'm looking at all my organization, or maybe you could do this at the team level. You'd even do it at your individual level, right? Because culture is individual to start and say, is this team or is this organization more of a collaborative kind of thing? Or are we a more competitive kind of thing? And it's funny because, a lot of people look at modern companies and go, they're all competitive. No, they're not all competitive. Different companies have different drivers, right? Different values that they're trying to do. The elements that then sort of drive behind those values are three: people, practice, and purpose. Okay. And they mirror the components of culture. So people are those bottom kind of survival things. What are you doing for your people? What are the roles and personas and the individual cultures in your company? Are you bringing in and hiring people who are aligned to your culture? When I interview people, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for cultural fit, right? I'm not looking for technical fit. I can train people. I can skill people up. I'm looking for cultural fit. And this is what we mean when we say a cultural interview is I'm kind of saying, okay, here's where we are. We're a collaborative company or we're a competitive company. Am I hiring people who are also in alignment to that culture so they fit in to that? Right. And then practice. What are the activities and behaviors that we're doing in those kind of things? Am I focusing more on human relations? That is our collaboration kind of thing. Am I looking at more open systems and people kind of use what tools and whatever they need to get done, whatever they need? Am I more competitive where I've got these targets and these goals and these objectives and we've got to hit these things and KPIs? I saw, what I can't remember. There was a little bit of joke I was going to tell, but forget that. And then control is, do we have, all these very extensive internal operational processes where people just don't need to think and they just do what they need to do in this structure? Right. So when we're doing these things, we have to kind of look at where we fit in terms of these quadrants, right? So in the collaborate quadrant, it's more about giving people, our purpose, and purpose is more of a driver or motivator here. Purpose is more around knowledge and community, and we're sharing together and we're working as a team, and it's all about, innovating together and as groups and everybody comes along, right? It's about teaching and counseling and community building, as opposed to create, where this is your lone artist kind of creator kind of thing, maybe working in smaller groups, but and empowering people to be entrepreneurs within your organization and innovation and exploring new things. Compete is about getting that market presence and really getting all those that speed and profits and driving that value kind of institution there. I shouldn't use the word instant value proposition there. And then control is all about making sure things work right the first time, right? And that we've got those kind of things, right? So which one is dominant for you? Okay, which one is that dominant one for you? Well, I'm going to give you another slide that's going to help you to answer that question. We're going to ask you a poll about that. So let's go to that. So here's the same thing. It's just in a little bit of a different view, same idea. But I've got some questions on the side that you should start thinking about for your own organization. So where do you currently sit, right? Is that, are you a clan? Are you adhocracy? Or Donna and I talked about this before. It's also known as holacracy. Are you more of a hierarchy, command and control structure? Are you more of a market presence kind of culture? Where do you fit in these things? That's your current state. And any kind of improvement we want to make is 2 points on a line. So that's our current state. What is your future state? Where do you want to be? Maybe it's within the same quadrant. Maybe you are already a clan culture and you want to stay one, but you want to improve within that. Well, then you should be taking efforts to improve within it, not trying to do things in the other cultures that don't really align to what you need to do. Okay. What are the things that are stopping you from doing these things? Right. And most of the time, barriers and risks and challenges are self imposed. If your processes are big and unwieldy and bureaucratic, it's because you've made them that way. It's not because they just naturally become big and hairy and crazy. Okay. Are you building or growing from the inside out? Back to this diagram here, right? Are you starting with the people and moving outward towards purpose? Or are you going the other way? Are you trying to dictate from the top down what your culture is going to be? Or are you trying to build your culture by looking at what all of the people contribute together, and then that aggregation makes your culture? And is it in line with where you see your organization or your team or yourself, right? Where are you going with these things? And then if there's an adjustment need to be made, how are you going to make those adjustments? What changes in people do you need to make, in processes, in technology, in information, or in those components of culture, right? Do you need to focus more on those bottom layers of culture, or do you need to spend more time on the top layers of culture and really driving and giving people what they need for better interaction or better spiritual or emotional wellness and mental health, right? That's another aspect of spiritual and intellectual capabilities. Or do you really need to fix your foundational, your survival or primary needs first in order to drive those? So I can't answer those questions for you. I could certainly talk with you about it, but those are questions you have to ask for yourself. So Donna, let's put up that next poll. So where are you? Which one do you think your organization is today? And basically it's where the bulk of your culture sits, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to be only 100% clan or 100% market. It may be that's where the majority of your drive and your motivation and your purpose and your people kind of sit. You've hired very competitive people, you are working in that, right? So what is that sort of mix that you've got?
And Mike,
What's dominant? Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
well, when we were talking, you had shared this with me ahead of time, and
Hmm.
you were sharing with me that there are some like industries that lean to one of these quadrants. So,
Correct.
things like, where do nonprofits sit? Where does academia sit? Where do corporate America sit? Can you just speak to that quickly while the folks are
Yeah, so the military and most religious organizations are hierarchies. Okay, so if you're in the government, you're probably a hierarchy. If you are in startup organizations, you're probably an adhocracy. This was the dot bomb boom in California many years ago in Silicon Valley, but this is where your small, innovative, entrepreneurial type organizations are. You also companies that do a lot of creative work, marketing organizations are generally in the adhocracy, those kind of things. Your market organizations are your big organizations that really press the stockholder value. This is where a lot of organizations tend to end up because of financial pressures. Not that they want to be there, but this is where they end up. Nonprofits really are not any one of these. It just depends. So an organization, a nonprofit like Red Cross, is really to me a market organization. They want to be the dominant provider of services in disasters, right? And so they can be a nonprofit and still be a market-driven company. It's not necessarily about profits, it's about who do people turn to in terms of what they need from your organization, right? So it's aggressively competing kind of thing. Clan organizations, these are going to be a lot of your IT organizations to start. So this is going to be your Googles and your Apples to start. Over time, though, your Googles and your Apples will move over to your either hierarchy or market cultures. But this is where they start because it's about, let's all code together and Scrum and work on products together and those kind of things. So just high level kind of thing. This is educators too. Educators, higher ed is usually clan kind of thing. Again, it's not that there aren't parts of other things. Certainly, higher education institutions are going to have some aspect of hierarchy, but it's not what drives that organization, right?
So while you were talking at that, I was watching the polls tick up as people kind of realize, like, oh, okay, now I maybe kind of see better where I fit. So here we go. I'm going to end the poll. But Mike, some interesting comments got made that maybe you want to comment on. One was, there's the culture our leadership tells us we are, and there is what we really are. But another really interesting comment was that my company is market, my customer is hierarchy. So that's very interesting when you have two cultures that have to collaborate. Interesting perspective there. So let me share the results just so you can see lots of
Yeah, that
lots
I'm
of
not surprised.
kind of across the boards there.
Yeah, but I'm not surprised that hierarchy and market are a little bit higher because this is where financial pressures and stock market and Wall Street and government regulation, all these things tend to drive companies into hierarchy and market. Again, it's not necessarily where you want the organization to be, but people don't fight against those pressures. They just and a lot of these things have become institutions. So to me, stock market and Wall Street is an institution unto itself, right? And it those pressures drive from the outside in. And that's an interesting comment about the market and hierarchy. This is why at times mergers might not work. We just went through this as an organization, right? I worked for Thirdera. We're now part of Cognizant. Does when you're looking at a merger and acquisition, this is what you should be looking at, not at the bottom line, not at the spreadsheets, not at the compatibility of finances. You should look at, do the cultures match? The HP Compact merger is a good example. Wrong culture, right? Trying to force two cultures together that weren't compatible. And that's just going to lead to problems. And ultimately, what happens is one leads, one dominates, right? And it pushes the other one out oftentimes. Historically, in civilizations, what would happen is you'd have two civilizations that would clash, and what would come out of it is a whole new civilization that was a mix of the two, but one was definitely more dominant. Right. And the same thing happens with mergers and acquisitions is you still have some remnants of both cultures, but one dominates over the other. And it just kind of rolls over and crushes the other one, especially crosswise, right? So a market organization merging with a clan, it's just going to decimate the clan culture. It's just going to crush it. Same way a hierarchy is going to crush an adhocracy. All right, questions, comments. Oh, I got one more thing. Sorry. So how do we make this work? Okay, how do you shift and adjust from one to the other? Well, you follow the flow, and this is basically a Deming plan, do, check, act, right? What are the components you have in place in your organization? What are the gaps? Where are you missing in terms of being a clan or being an adhocracy? What is the individual makeup of your organization? Map those individual cultures to the desired culture type, right? Do people actually fit? Do instruments fit? Do institutions, do everything you have fit to what your desired culture is? Assess whether you've aligned those things correctly, adjust as needed, and then leverage that culture and keep improving. So this is your, plan, do, check, act, right? This is your do it again, rinse and repeat. Questions, comments, concerns, thoughts. What do we got, Donna? Nothing?
So one question is, what can individuals do, you know, to help shift the culture in their organization?
So first thing, understand your own culture. Go through those six components of culture and ask yourself questions of, is this need fulfilled in this organization? Am I feeling that these things, I'm getting these things? Do I feel like I have employment stability or I have salary or I don't have to worry about whether I have a contract next week or whatever it may be? Do I have a sense of where I sit in the organization, right? So just go up the pyramid and look at yourself first. Then go and talk to others. Look at other people in your team, see if they fit in their way, right? And what this is going to start to do is reveal the gaps that I was talking about, right? So you're going to do this kind of at an individual level. You're going to apply this whole loop at an individual level. Then you're going to apply it at a team level. Then you're going to apply it at a department level. And then you're going to apply it at an organizational level. And ultimately, the idea is you should start to reveal gaps in your cultural makeup that you maybe want to adjust or take up. And you have to open up the conversation and have the conversations at all levels and use these kind of tools that I was talking about, right? This is why I provided something like the competing values framework, and have open and honest conversations with leadership and say, hey, are you familiar with these kind of things? And I think we're a clan, you think we're a market. And this is why I think we struggle sometimes, because we have competing cultures here in the same organization. And is that working or not working? Sometimes friction and competition can be good. Other times it's going to just destroy you. Hopefully that helps.
And I think operating models change over time. You know,
Correct.
companies started out a small little startup and they grew into, a larger organization. And so you can want to hold on to that autocracy mindset that you have when you're a startup all you want. But once you become a big company, if you want to be a big company, you have to act like a big company. And that means
Correct.
starting to add in some institutions.
Correct.
Um,
And shift to some level of hierarchy. And it may not be, I mean, the idea is don't just pendulum swing, which is what everybody does, right? Find balance. What's the right balance between the amount of hierarchy culture you have in place and the amount of adhocracy or clan, right? That's the idea, is what's the right balance for you and your organization?
I think what's interesting too is that um, it's that kind of sweet spot of it can't be dictated from the top down. It has to be built from the bottom up. But the
Correct.
sweet spot is kind of in the middle when you can kind of cross that line from just survival to now really achieving great things as an organization.
Yeah, so think of this as, in a sense, a type of balanced scorecard, right? And the idea of a balanced scorecard measures and measurements is that if I put too much emphasis in quadrant one, it's going to decrease my capabilities in quadrant four, because think of it, it's all being balanced on this center point, right, Donna? And the idea is I have to find the right balance between all of these things. I'm probably going to dominate always in one, but I have to pick the best parts of the others to help me.
Right. So I don't see any other questions. Oh, hold on. Another question just came in. We are a change management organization that helps our customers change while the ones that hire us get it. How do we help others within the customer organization buy in? This is
By
kind of what you do for a living, right, Mike?
Yeah, so the idea is you have to understand, again, it just goes back to the cycle of understanding at the individual level. So too often I've seen with things like organizational change, companies try to mass change, right? Hey, we're going to send this communication out, and guess what? Next week we're going to have this new organization and you're going to love it, as opposed to change should really happen, and cultural change in particular should happen at the individual level first, and it should be a groundswell. If you look at like Rogers adoption theory, right, where you have these groups of early adopters, and then you've got these people who are kind of skeptics in the middle, and then you've got your laggards. His whole idea is you don't start by eliminating the laggards, you start with the people who are on board and move towards the laggards. Same way here is you start with the individuals who get it and are part of the kind of culture that you want. You go find the people who represent or already practice this culture. You use them as your early adopters, and then they go and convince their friends, and then they go work with you to work on more people. And it has to be a groundswell. It's kind of like Cotter with his sense of urgency and his guiding coalition idea.
Right.
Cotter's the
Right.
same way. It wasn't do these things in any order. It was start with number one and go to number eight. Right?
Right.
That was the idea. Same way here is, start with the individual and work up towards the organization to change it.
Yep. So we're coming up against the hour. We always want to thank everybody for spending time with us. We're working on a great webinar for next month. It's about AI ops. We continue to talk about AI. And so if that's a topic area you're interested in, stay tuned for more information about that. Mike, amazing as always. Like people were kind of saying, hands down, one of the best sessions I've been to about culture. Great session. Just really, throughout, like from the get-go, people were saying, even really early on, this is one of the best presentations they've been to. And always here at the Academy how grateful we are when we get to hang out with you for a little while. So thank you so much.
My
And
pleasure.
thank you to everybody else for joining us this month. And we hope to see you soon at either a future webinar or in our classroom. So thank you all. Have an awesome day, and we'll see you next time.
Cheers.